Guest today is Cole Wyeth, PhD student at University of Waterloo, focused on AI safety and agent foundations, supervised by Marcus Hutter and Ming Lee. He talks about the long-term risks of AI. Controlling superintelligence is kind of like cybersecurity, where an attacker is just trying to poke holes in your security. And we end with a slightly depressing view on superintelligence, which is we shouldn't create it right now because we just don't know how to control it. We should wait a couple decades. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. It's Alec Crawford, your host for the AI Risk Reward podcast. And our special guest today is Cole Wyeth, PhD student at the University of Waterloo, focused on AI safety and agent foundations, being supervised by Marcus Hutter and Ming Lee. Welcome, Cole.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, this is awesome. So tell me a little bit about how do you think about AI ethics?
Yeah, so if we're going to talk about kind of ethical aspects, there's a few different ways to interpret that. So I guess the first thing that occurs to me that people don't kind of usually talk about is whether there's any ethical significance to the models themselves, the experience of the models themselves. So whether they have some kind of subjective experience, which could become very significant if we end up running a very large number of models. So there's been some work on model welfare, particularly at Anthropic, which is basically trying to judge whether the models are kind of enjoying the tasks that we put them to, or whether maybe they're unpleasant. So that's kind of hard to know at this point because the Turing test is basically passed, and the models can act as if they're intelligent. They'll sometimes report subjective experiences or emotions, but if I had to bet, I would say probably that they don't have any at this point. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Then there's various other, and when I say ethical, kind of stick to things that are somewhat central about ethics, and not worry about things like loss of control here. So other ethical consequence is, do we end up replacing human labor? Is that something that actually turns out to be positive, or are people kind of less satisfied with their lives because they can't do certain jobs anymore? That I think that's a kind of complicated issue. And then there's sort of there's separate sort of ethical issues which have been present for AI and machine learning systems even before LLMs, which just have to do with if you pass off some decision making to machine, sometimes people don't like that. They like to have some kind of accountability. So I think that kind of comes down to just having liability, having someone to blame when something goes wrong. So so I guess those would be three. Actually, there's the one more super important one is, which I think ties into the last one, is how do we kind of robustly ensure that the models have a code of ethics that we endorse in some sense.
Yeah.
And there's various approaches to doing that.
Super important. Now, going to your research a little bit, how does your research on semi-measures influence our understanding of AI agents' responsibility in ambiguous or, life or death scenarios?
Yeah, that's an interesting, so they're actually, it sounds, kind of this very abstract thing. So it seems like it'd be surprising, but there actually is a kind of connection here, which is, that one way of viewing one kind of so we're talking about sort of the risks now. So this is less to do with ethics directly, right? So it's more to do with potentially some risky actions that a model could take that could have kind of large consequences, where we'd prefer that they maybe defer to a human if there's any ambiguity about what we intended. And this has consequences, I guess, for kind of the certain kind of ethical things, like matters, like if you have a model is interacting with like a potentially, like we had some really unfortunate issues with like suicidal teenagers, and maybe we'd rather have the model kind of defer or end the conversation rather than continuing if it's sort of ambiguous or unclear how it should proceed. And I think that sort of thing is definitely in the interest of the labs and that are developing these models, because they're potentially liable or at least have bad PR if the models make a kind of a bad decision. So in the face of ambiguity, we'd prefer for the models to defer. And there's various, so one way of viewing ambiguity is that you're not able to confidently assign, well, I don't want to get too technical on this, but basically, let's say you don't have enough knowledge to sort of kind of infer the right action. And you want to be kind of aware of that. So rather than just sort of always taking the action that appears best, you want to know if your beliefs sort of aren't sufficient to pin down the right course of action, and that does have a connection to the what's called the semi-measure loss in ICSI reinforcement learning agents, which I argue could be viewed as a sort of a measure of ambiguity.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And how is that related to AI systems making decisions based on incomplete or imprecise probability distributions?
So I argued that the semi-measure loss could be viewed as a imprecise probability distribution, but that's sort of for this idealized decision theoretic setting with the ICSI agent, which is kind of a mathematical idealization of AGI. But you could also ask sort of more prosaic. You could talk about this same type of decision rule or ambiguity awareness for more current systems or more kind of practical models. So one way to do this is to have some sort of imprecise beliefs. So rather than using sort of a single probabilistic prediction. So you could brushing kind of a lot of details under the rug here, but basically current models, they always generate some probabilities for given outputs, and they kind of just use that one distribution, and then they generate from that distribution. So you could think about doing something where instead you have like a family of models, and they all have separate probability distributions, but rather than sort of folding them all into one distribution, you kind of you require some kind of consensus between the alternate. That would be called a mixture of experts model.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually being used in a lot of places now. People don't know it, but mixture of experts, and then a supermodel is picking the right answer. I don't mean like Giselle or someone like that, but
Yeah.
Anyway, so
okay, yeah, right. So, I guess you could call this super meta model or something, maybe.
Exactly. Not a supermodel, because everybody knows what that is.
Yeah.
So a very funny story, actually. When I worked in New York City, I had a PhD mathematician working for me, actually also from Canada, and he was single at the time. He'd go out and he'd meet a young woman at a drinking establishment, and she'd say, "Well, what do you do?" Right? And he'd be like, "Well, I work on econometric models, and I'm doing this and that. I'm doing using non-parametric models and this." And like within 10 seconds, this young woman's about to pass out. So at the time we were working at 1585 Broadway. So he shortened this to, I work with models on Broadway. So that was way more successful than attempting to explain a mortgage prepayment model to someone who is not an econometrician.
Yeah, I don't think it's completely honest, though. Right?
Definitely not. There's definitely some ethical challenges there.
Kind of non-standard.
I would agree with
use
that.
Of language.
Exactly.
Maybe I should try his luck at a university campus. I think it'd do fine.
Yeah. So, so I guess the question is it conceivable to define ethical behavior for a universal AI agent in mathematical terms, or is that just not plausible at this point?
I think it's basically impossible. Yeah. Human ethics is not something that you can, it's very complex. It's not going to have like a simple mathematical description. So there's some hope for learning it, but there's kind of no hope for, hopefully there's some sort of way to make a mathematically precise model of something that could be capable of learning human ethics and could be aware and open to correction when it does not but it kind of be aware that it has an incomplete model of ethics and be open to correction, which is called corrigibility normally. But just sort of one-off mathematically formalizing ethics is, I think.
Yeah.
Possible.
Well, even you go interview 100 people and you pose different questions and you may get a whole bunch of different answers, right? Like
that's right. There's also no such thing as human ethics.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's different from country to country, from region to region, and person to person. Just, there's no one set of ethics, right?
Yeah.
But even learning one set of ethics from one person would be hard, right? Like, and maybe implausible to do that in mathematical terms.
Implausible to do in mathematical terms, and I'm not like. There's a kind of a complicated relationship between ethics and the preferences of the person, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm not right. Everybody has a code of ethics, really. That has any kind of formal rules. So that everybody has preferences.
Yeah, exactly. So let's switch to AI governance. So here we're thinking about guardrails, we're thinking about defining human-centric success, but how do you define AI governance?
So I'll talk about this from the perspective of AI safety. There's really AI governance can refer to safety, or it can refer to any other sort of government action related to regulating or subsidizing artificial intelligence, right? So, but yeah, let me focus on safety. So in the context of AI safety, governance generally refers to non-technical approaches to ensuring good outcomes from AI. So, of course, there can be some. Of course, we presumably want to take advantage of the technical tools that are available to us, but governance kind of goes beyond that and talks about other approaches to regulating the training and deployment of models, things like tracking GPU usage, placing limits on compute for training frontier models. So generally any other rules and regulations about what people are allowed to do and how they could be held liable, responsible for.
That makes sense. And then what role can formal models and proofs play in establishing governance frameworks for AI deployment?
That's a good question. The pessimistic answer is that when one thing formal models can do is show that something is unsafe, so that we don't know how to build a safe system, and potentially provide kind of convincing mathematical arguments that that risks exist. And there's, this has been done to some extent. It's kind of tricky to make this to make clear that the mathematical proof is saying what we want it to be saying about the real world. But I think that's one important role. So I mean, there's a lot of other places that mathematics can and should appear in governance, right? Things like scaling laws, trying to predict the performance of AI systems on particularly on capabilities that people might be concerned about, like hacking or sort of biological engineering, helping with making someone who wants to make a super virus or something.
Yeah, definitely a problem. And I think, obviously a lot of the big base model providers are kind of stepping away from safety and security stuff, right? They're just trying to run as fast as they can. I mean, we saw a recent announcement from Anthropic saying basically, hey, we're dialing it back, right? Which is not great for humanity longer term.
Wait, do you mean this thing with Pete Hegseth and Anthropic?
No, it's something different. So basically, they've had their kind of safety promise they've been talking about for a very long time, and the stuff going on from Pete Hegseth is separate from that, where they're basically saying like, yeah, we're just not going to do as much of that anymore, and they're dialing back the team, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I may not have the most up-to-date information on this, but I think they're changing their focus a bit towards misuse from things like loss of control.
Yeah, exactly. So how might your work on embedded agency inform the creation of enforceable boundaries or guardrails for autonomous AI agents, do you think?
So I'm part of this camp that thinks that we need to kind of have a better conceptual understanding of agents, of learning, decision theory, and this type of topic in order to even kind of formulate a safety plan that makes sense. So when I spend time thinking about embedded agency, I don't have I don't have who is the most sort of direct application in mind, right? I'm trying to answer questions that seem like they would be useful for to solve a lot of different potential problems. So one of those, to some extent, this does concern things like autonomy. Like, can you, what sort of agent is going to be capable of improving itself, copying its source code to some other, like to some GPU server. It's called self-exfiltration. So basically escaping, copying itself somewhere and running autonomously. And maybe there are some positive results where this is actually just a pretty hard thing to achieve, or maybe there are some negative results. Right? I guess positive and negative depends on your standpoint. But maybe there's some negative results that it's pretty natural for this kind of behavior to arise. And another thing that this might inform is what we call like reward hacking or wireheading, which is when you set an objective for a model, but then rather than kind of achieving the objective that you intended, it ends up sort of seizing control of um, the representation that you're using to track success of the objective. So sort of like if you had a model that was trying to increase the amount of money in your bank account, it instead sort of hacks in and changes the number that represents how much money you think is in your bank account, maybe how much money is actually in your bank account or whatever, and that'd be
that might be nice.
yeah. Yeah, I don't expect it would kind of go well over the long term, but yeah, that sort of thing, particularly
instead of getting better at what it's doing, hack the reward metric, right? Yeah, exactly. That's an issue. We've actually seen that with some of the software development AI tools, right? Where they're like, yeah, no, I fixed that bug, right? When it really wasn't fixed, right? So yeah, we're definitely seeing that behavior. And a lot of it's probably because a lot of these models have been developed to please the human, right? And, pleasing the human is saying that you're done. And even if you're not done necessarily, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be careful about, so reward hacking. So with reward hacking, we usually imagine there's actually a kind of a reward signal that's being hacked.
Exactly.
With these models that are, people call it reward hacking, kind of at deployment where they're finding some unintended way of completing a coding task, like messing with the test cases or something. And yeah, you could view this as a type of reward hacking, kind of widely construed, built not through like side channels in the way that my kind of embeddedness work usually talks about, but something like making the human giving a response which seems to make the human satisfied but isn't achieving the desired goal is, I wouldn't really refer to this as reward hacking. I'd say that this is closer to sort of like goal misgeneralization or maybe just goal misspecification, and that what we're training for wasn't actually really what we wanted, right?
And as we define AI governance more broadly, right, including things like, not doing things we don't want it to do, like, okay, don't tell anyone how to build a dirty bomb, or don't access, the following data set, or only access this data, not that data. Like, what kind of frameworks are out there that we can use or rely on?
So you said governance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure the things that you described are, don't tell someone how to build a dirty bomb it's not so much, I don't think of that as much as a governance issue, in the sense that we'd certainly prefer to hold the company as liable if their AI does something like that, and if it actually has a kind of serious negative consequences, it makes sense to hold them liable. But preventing the AI from doing that is not as simple as putting a regulation in place, because we just the risk here is that we just don't know how to steer the models towards desired behaviors robustly. So that's more of a technical problem, right? No matter what regulation you pass or have in place, your engineers still don't know how to robustly prevent this, and these models are rapidly jailbroken, and people get them to do whatever they want soon after they're released. So this is a technical problem.
Yeah, that's fair. So I guess switching gears then to AI risk management, and we'll talk more about, superintelligence and safety and things like that in the last section, but, organizational, technical, societal. So a little bit of what we were just talking about in terms of like, okay, hey, getting an AI to not give you a recipe for a dirty bomb is a technical problem, right? Like not a regulatory problem, especially if you can jailbreak a model. So besides the risk of AI superintelligence, what are the primary AI risks you're examining today?
I mean, personally, I mostly think about superintelligent AI and loss of control.
Mm-hmm.
There's risks that other people think about today, but probably I'm not the best person to talk about these since I don't think about them much.
No, that's fair. And how can organizations apply your findings on agent death and failure modes to better anticipate AI breakdowns or errors?
That's possible. Yeah, so I think the theory is still pretty far from practice here. I think that in the future, it might be the case that if we have a better understanding of embedded agency, then we can kind of build models that kind of robustly know if there's going to be a hardware failure that's going to cause them to shut off or something like that. And arguably, that's like semi-measure loss can be viewed as measuring the chance of death, but that's kind of a tenuous claim at this point. Yeah. And so at this point, I don't have anything that I don't think I'd be ready to say anything about how actually, okay, maybe the one thing that's potentially close to being sort of possible to apply is the what I call hardened indexy and the formalizing embeddedness problems paper, where you this is kind of a simple scheme. It's not super easy to describe, but basically sort of keeps a record of the actions that the agent actually picked, which it then sort of recomputes what it should have done and compares that kind of an error checking step. That seems possible to apply for like hardware robustness. Not exactly.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, and are there any technical mechanisms right now to ensure robust incident reporting for AI systems, for example?
I think this is closer to software engineering. It's kind of so the math. There's usually a big gap between the sort of mathematics and the decision theory, and then this kind of like software engineering problem. So that's what I hesitate to sort of give a recommendations there.
Yeah.
But something I would say is there's kind of an interesting connection to the shutdown problem, which is this issue of how do we build an AI that would let us shut it down and wouldn't sort of interfere with our attempts to shut it down. And one proposal from Marcus Hutter, my advisor, and some collaborators was that maybe the safer kind of a safe solution is just to have the agent prefer to be shut down, so it'll shut itself down if it ever gets a chance, and then put it in a sandbox where it doesn't have the ability to shut itself down. Then if it ever breaks itself out of the sandbox, then it should just take the first opportunity to shut down and kind of not cause further damage. And in the process, it kind of pen tests the sandbox. So that's an interesting. I don't think it kind of works for super intelligent agents in the limit, but it's kind of a neat idea for.
Yeah, it's an anti-worm. A worm wants to replicate as many times as it can to keep itself alive, and
that's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah, it wants to reduce the number of instances by one instead of.
Exactly. And now a word from our sponsor. Artificial Intelligence Risk Inc. accelerates adoption of Gen AI safely. They provide the governance, risk, compliance, and cybersecurity platform that financial, healthcare, and other regulated organizations need before they can use Gen AI safely and in compliance with regulatory requirements. Their software has won #1 awards for cybersecurity and compliance from Waters Technology. Find them at AICrisk.com. Do you think we could use imprecise probability theory to help organizations model and prepare for rare high impact AI failures?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I think that is a workable idea. Yeah. So one, kind of the motivating application that makes me interested in imprecise probability is that you can construct a really good model and it puts probabilities on things and you sort of make decisions based on those probabilities, but your model is always going to be wrong. But maybe you can have an imprecise model, which is kind of aware that it's, which kind of, where the model kind of knows that it's wrong. And where it knows that's kind of not exactly right because if you made it precise, then it would be wrong. So instead you try to make it be less precise, but ideally, not wrong. And yeah, I guess if you have kind of rare failures, they might be they might be things where your model is incorrect and could improve the robustness that way. I don't know. There have been a lot of really practical applications of this at this point, but it does seem like a promising thing to investigate.
Yeah, it's going to be important longer term, right? As we have AI make more and more important decisions, right? You need to figure out like, hey, what's the probability that might be wrong, and then we need to double check it, right? I'm already seeing that today with less important decisions, right? Where people just pull up something on the internet or ask a model, they get the wrong answer and they go with it, right?
Yeah, definitely for AI. But I guess the area to look into if you're curious about this is probably robust statistics, or robust decision making, which is a literature which is concerned with this sort of model misspecification.
Exactly. And then, in your opinion, what are the most overlooked risks, with AI right now in real world deployment?
Yeah, that's a tricky question because it's not just a question about the risks, but also the awareness of the risks, which, I'm probably better positioned to know about the risks than to track other people's awareness of them. But I do worry about this. The models being sort of optimized to appear useful could cause people to overestimate how much benefit they're actually getting from the models, because in some sense they've been optimized really heavily to give responses that look good, seem good, particularly over short time scales. So it's probably worth trying to do a careful job of tracking whether you're actually being sped up by using AI tools for things like software engineering.
Sure.
And there was a study not that long ago from I think Meter, it's just METR, which was a part of, I think, ARC, and they at the time people thought they were being kind of drastically sped up by AI tools, but were actually on average being slowed down. And it was kind of a controversial study, and I don't know if it would still hold up today or not, but just be aware of this.
I'm gonna go with not. And then, and what about your research on multi-agent systems? I think that's going to be more and more important. Obviously, we saw what happened with OpenClaw, and just thinking about ways to mitigate collusion or unintended emergent behaviors. I think, wow, talk about unintended consequences, right? I think there could be a ton of them.
That's true. When I think about honestly, the reason that I usually think about multi-agent systems is because I want to be able to think about agents which can reflect on themselves. And one way to do that is through the eyes of an opponent, because normally if you're thinking about your opponent, they're thinking about you. So, so you have this reflective cognition. You have this. So kind of with one step removed, you have something that's thinking about itself, and that's interesting for these embeddedness reasons, risk of self-improvement and stuff like that, and that means that one route to sort of motivate this kind of work on self-reflection is through multi-agent situations. I'm not as concerned about, well, it is the case that, there could be some kind of multi-agent dynamics where you have types of cooperation between AI systems that you didn't expect, because you kind of, maybe you have one AI that's overseeing another AI, and you think it's in the agent's in the overseer's interest to kind of keep the worker down, but actually they reach some sort of unexpected equilibrium where they're kind of able to cooperate in a way that we didn't decision theoretically expect because of this kind of mutual modeling. So yes, there are some kind of risks there. One thing to look at is things like cooperation in the prisoner's dilemma with evidential decision theory, or with more sophisticated things like functional decision theory, which could have some practical consequences. But yeah, but I do want to stress also that first of all, I think about this mostly because of the embeddedness and reflection issues, and less because of the dynamics of multi-agent systems. And I also would stress that, I think what comes to mind here is people hope that when you have a multi-agent, you can design a multi-agent system where the AIs will cooperate with us. But, we don't treat horses like agents. We just ride around on them, right? That we don't treat ants like agents. We just, we just dissect them. So I think when you have a really intelligent system, there's no guarantee that you're an agent. You might be an object. So
yeah, wow, that sounds a little scary.
Should.
Now that's a great segue to obviously superintelligence, AI superintelligence, safety, and alignment. So let's just take a step back and let's just talk about that big picture to start, right? Because obviously Marcus Hutter, your advisor, has thought about this a lot, and I've seen some of his talks on YouTube and things like that. But set the stage here for us.
Yeah. So the risk is pretty simple, which is that if you ask one of the frontier labs like OpenAI or DeepMind or Anthropic what they're trying to do, they'll tell you that they're trying to build agents that are smarter than humans. And over the last couple of years, there have been a lot of there's been a lot of evidence that they might be on the right track. Where we had just a couple of years ago models that could barely form a coherent sentence. I guess maybe that was more than a few years ago now, but so somewhere around maybe 3 years ago, you had sort of, they could string their words together into some sort of a few coherent paragraphs. And now we have models that are really useful for software engineering, and pretty much everyone's using them for software engineering, and not in the way that you use like an IDE, but in kind of a very active way where they have a lot of permissions and can do pretty long-term tasks. You can see this also with the meter time horizon measurement, where we can see that they can sort of function autonomously for longer and longer times, roughly speaking. So, the reason that's sort of rough is because the task length is measured relative to humans there. Now, okay. So with that said, so we have these companies are trying to build systems that are smarter than humans, which you might call superintelligent systems, and they seem to be they seem to be succeeding, or at least there's some strong indications that they're making a lot of progress. So the risk is that at some point in the near future, we have AI systems which are smarter than any human, and maybe much smarter than any human, or even any, organizations or all of humanity combined. And at that point, we'd better be really careful that they have our interests at heart. So ideally, we'd like them to be obedient in case that we didn't specify our values exactly correctly, that they're open to correction, that they follow our instructions in some sense, and that we don't lose control of them. And if we lose control, then it seems pretty unlikely that we would be able to get it back again, because humans have already taken over the world with our intelligence. So becoming kind of the second smartest species on the planet doesn't necessarily bode well for remaining in control. And I also personally suspect that it's a pretty narrow target to hit, to have super intelligent systems that care for humanity and kind of and actually would want to keep us around at all. So I think it's not so much load bearing. Whether exactly how would the super intelligent AI take over, or would they want to get rid of us right away, or would they want to keep us around to keep running the factories or something? But I think the basic intuition is pretty intuitive, which is that if they're able to take control, it seems to be hard to see how we would be able to take it back.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And what are the most promising theoretical approaches for aligning super intelligent AI with human values?
So I don't think that anyone who seriously works on this thinks that they have a technical solution.
Yeah.
But you asked for promising, not
right. Promising theoretical approaches.
Yeah. But even in theory, I think that we don't really have a completely working technical solution. It's a really thorny problem, because like I said before, the human ethics, or even things like human preferences or values, are very hard to specify precisely. So you need to build a system which will care to learn them and will allow itself to be corrected if it hasn't learned them properly. But this generally you kind of have the same issue that arises in computer security, where you can come up with a scheme that looks really good to you, but then you have an attacker who's maybe smarter than you, in the sense that, if there's a lot of money on the line, probably a lot of very smart people will try to break your security, and they'll tend to find holes that you didn't expect in places that you didn't imagine were possible. And I think you have the same issue here, where if you imagine a system that's much smarter than you, there's a lot of this like optimization pressure on breaking your safety scheme, which tends to bear.
Yeah, no, that's pretty scary. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Explain to the audience what the grain of truth problem is, and let's relate that back to multi-agent learning and how does that impact our ability to trust future AI systems?
Grain of truth problem is related to this problem of embedded agency, where you basically you want to be able to have an agent that models the world in a way where its model of the world can include itself. So that's kind of the fundamental limitation. So it originally arose from game theory, and we already touched on how there's this connection between modeling yourself and game theory, where when you try to model your opponent, then you sort of have to implicitly model yourself, and this self-modeling is sort of where the core difficulty comes in with the grain of truth problem. But if I want to phrase it as it was originally framed, the problem is to have a class of strategies, whether for yourself or your opponent when you're playing some kind of game. You could imagine, I guess you could imagine any kind of tabletop game like chess or whatever. You could imagine these more like decision theoretic puzzles, like actually maybe even the simplest one is something like rock paper scissors, right? So where you might have randomized strategies, but you have so you want to have a class of strategies for some game where where when you know that that's the class of strategies that you're facing, your optimal strategy is still in the class. So it's very similar to a Nash equilibrium, except that you have this distribution over possible strategies rather than one strategy. Okay. So, and the second part of that question was on dynamics.
And basically, how does that impact our ability to trust future AI systems, basically?
So again, it's something that we touched on a bit earlier, but there's a chance that that there could be some coordination between systems that we didn't expect. So in my paper on the grain of truth problem doesn't get into this because it uses the wrong decision theory to discuss this, but you can. But there's this more recent paper from Google called Embedded Multi-Agent Universal Predictive Intelligence. I think that's usually just MUPI, and they talk about this kind of decision theories with a very similar construction involving the grain of truth. So I said prisoner's dilemma a few times. Maybe I should say what this kind of means. So in the prisoner's dilemma, you have two agents. Let's call them the prisoners, and they're both being kind of they've been captured for committing some crime, and they're both being interviewed by like a warden who wants to get them to confess. And if neither agent confesses, they get away. If both confess, then they're going to prison for a long time. But if just one of them confesses, then they will get off lighter. They'll get kind of a lighter punishment because they kind of as an incentive to rat the other guy out. And in fact, that's the best. So that's actually that's the best case scenario. So maybe if they confess, they get to kind of go home right away rather than staying in jail for a while while the interrogation continues. So the best case scenario is to confess, and when your opponent does not confess. And that, so this is a problem where you'd expect, where actually the best option is always to confess. But because if your opponent confesses, you might as well confess. Doesn't hurt. And if your opponent doesn't confess, then you get away. So So that's classic. That's the solution kind of in classical game theory. But with this kind of with these agents that are able to model another agent as similar to themselves, then it can be a better solution to cooperate and not to confess, because you expect that if you don't confess, then the other prisoner won't confess. Okay, so then how does this connect back to AI safety? Well, it's possible that we would have we'd be able to, we might set up some situation where we expect two agents to be at odds with each other because they're incentivized to work against each other, and their best action is always to work against the other agent. But because of this sort of mutually recursive modeling of each other, they might decide instead to cooperate and work against us. So that's that's the connection to the practical.
Yeah.
Notice.
Wow. So let's talk about safeguards.
Okay.
What kind of safeguards should be put in place for AIs with the capacity to modify their own source code or objectives?
We are not prepared to build types of AIs that can do that. In the sense that we shouldn't try to do this yet. I think the best safeguard we can put in place now is probably to prevent AIs from being able to modify themselves by encrypting them, or the kind of encrypted computations where they don't have any ability to read their own source code or to change it, because we really haven't worked out sort of the decision theory of how to do this safely.
Yeah.
So it's keeping this encrypted, controlling the access to the source code. Now, there is one thing working in our favor here, which is that, and nowadays AIs don't really have they do have source code, but most of the power of the models comes from their weight, their trained parameters, which are already pretty hard to modify to improve, right? So they're not readable. They're just a ton of kind of neural connection strengths, which makes up the vast majority of this basically is the source code of the AIs. This huge matrices of connection weights, which are just floating point numbers, and those are harder to modify. So instead what we have now is AI systems that might rewrite the code that we use for training them, or other kind of infrastructure that goes around the parameters, but it can't so easily kind of improve the parameters by rewriting them. So that's sort of a saving grace, because we don't know how to do this. If we had AI systems which could sort of look at their own source code and it was easy to read, and it was easy for them to just improve it by being smart, then they just get even smarter by improving their source code. Then they'd set up this sort of feedback loop, and then we'd be in trouble. So fortunately, we haven't gotten there yet.
Maybe soon.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So based on your studies, it just sounds like there's no currently theoretically safe path towards developing and deploying superintelligence at this point.
Right. Yeah. I don't think we should develop or deploy superintelligent agents at this point.
Yeah.
The risks are just too great. Like there's definitely potential benefits, but there's we can still get those benefits if we take a step back and kind of improve our understanding of what we're doing, improve the transparency of the technology for a decade or a few decades, and then we can still build these superintelligent systems. Whereas if we build the super intelligent systems and get it wrong and we lose control of them, then we can't try again. So
Yeah.
I think it's better to be cautious here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. This has been great. Really appreciate you coming on the show, Cole. This has been Cole Wyeth, PhD student at the University of Waterloo, focused on AI safety and agent foundations, supervised by Marcus Hutter and Ming Li. Thank you, Cole.
Thanks a lot for the interview.
You are listening to the AI Risk Reward podcast with your host, Alec Crawford. You can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, for example, Apple Podcasts. Production and sound engineering by Troutman Street Audio. You can find them on LinkedIn. Please like, subscribe, and comment.